Okay, hello and welcome to our audience members joining us from across the globe. I'm Raymond Karam, the Chief Program and Development Officer here at the Arab Gulf States Institute. We're happy to have you all with us today as we host a discussion assessing President Trump's visit to the Gulf, which included Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. And to help us do that, we have assembled an excellent panel of experts. I'll introduce them very briefly here and add a link to their full bios in the chat. First, I'd like to welcome Aya Batrawy, NPR international correspondent who leads its Gulf Bureau in Dubai. She joined NPR in 2022 from the Associated Press, where she was an editor and reporter for over 11 years. She moved to Dubai in 2013 with AP, where she reported on tensions with Iran and the emergence of Gulf Arab states as the region's new power brokers. Also, a warm welcome to our friend Mohammed Baharoon, the Director General of Bahouth, which he established in 2002 in Dubai. He previously had a career in media where he worked as a reporter for Al Arabi magazine, Al Ittihad newspaper, and then as an editor for Gulf Defense magazine. And last but not least is Aziz Al-Ghaishan. He is a non-resident fellow at AGSI and fellow with the CPAT project. His research focuses on Saudi-Israel relations and Saudi foreign policy. Previously, he was a lecturer of politics and international relations at the University of Essex, where he taught Middle East studies, international relations, and political theory. And moderating the session today is Ambassador Bill Roebuck, the Executive VP of AGSI. He most recently served as a Deputy Special Envoy to the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS and a Senior Advisor to the Special Representative for Sierra Engagement. Previously, he served as U.S. Ambassador to Bahrain from 2015 to 2017. And with that, Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Raymond. Welcome, everyone, to today's program at Arab Gulf States Institute. So we're going to focus today on President Trump's visit. He wrapped up an ambitious Gulf visit last week. It was dominated by warm welcomes, lots of pomp and ceremony, and huge deals on AI, other high-tech, defense, energy, and aviation, along with reports of hundreds of billions of dollars committed to investments in the U.S. The optics were of a very comfortable, relaxed President Trump in the company of leaders that he saw or seemed to see eye to eye with, and a lot of mutual admiration. There was a surprising, bold diplomatic breakthrough on Syria. President Trump met with interim President Ahmed al-Shara, and he announced the unexpected lifting of all sanctions on Syria. The trip also serves as a reminder of the expanding influence of Gulf countries in the region and more broadly, and the centrality of these bilateral partnerships for the United States. We have a great panel of experts today from the region, and we look forward to assessing the President's visit from a range of regional perspectives. And we hope to seek answers to the question we pose in our title: are we, post-visit, heading into a new golden age in U.S. Gulf relations, or at least a new chapter in those relations? I'll remind our audience once again, as Raymond did, to use the Q&A function to ask your questions as we move along. And I will direct those questions to the panel members after I receive them. We'll try to keep this a conversation, so I encourage members of the audience to ask your questions. So let's get started. I thought I would ask maybe an introductory round of questions to each of our panel members to get their initial quick sense of the visit, its importance, what they thought was the most significant about it. Maybe I could start with you. Just a quick hit, your sense of the most important or significant aspects of the visit.
I mean, a lot of it went as expected with the royal welcome and, the over-the-top kind of lavish ceremonies held in his honor. Trump is known to love that kind of thing. Who wouldn't? And that's exactly what they gave him here in the Gulf. The Gulf is a region of tradition and culture and hospitality. And, Trump is seen as a friend of the region. What I thought was most interesting was kind of the groundwork that was laid ahead of his visit, with his son arriving to the region and launching a new Trump Tower in Dubai that's going to be massive. It's going to have $20 million penthouses, the world's tallest pool. He then went to Qatar and launched a new golf course, a new Trump golf course. We didn't see that in his first term as president. I think he feels more emboldened for his family to make those kinds of deals. We also saw a massive $2 billion crypto investment from the UAE into the family's cryptocurrency so that it could trade on Binance. So there was a lot leading up to the trip. And then, of course, there was the announcement that Qatar had offered the president a new Air Force Boeing airplane, which caught the most attention. But I think these other deals also were really interesting. So he's coming here, this is a friendly region to him. I think like there were surprises, of course, like the announcement that he would lift all sanctions on Syria. I think everyone in the region understands that that is long overdue, just given the fact that Syria can't remain on its knees like this. And the sanctions had never really hurt Bashar al-Assad himself. You can see that from, the empty, big lavish homes he lived in Damascus when he fled. They actually hurt average Syrians who weren't able to get cancer medications or spare parts for factories or, building materials, or even just, spare parts for hospital equipment. I went there after the earthquake 2 years ago in 2023, and I saw the impact of American sanctions, and they're not really hurting the regime. They were hurting average Syrians. So that was a policy that the U.S. seemed to be stuck in, and they, seem to be coming out of that now. But I think the biggest surprise to me was there was just no movement on Gaza. And you can't come to this region with Gaza flaring the way it is, with 100 to 150 people being killed a day, hospitals being struck, tents being struck, people starving to death, and walk away saying this was a really successful visit, because the region is still very unstable from that. Simply saying that people there are starving is kind of a baseline minimum thing to observe. We all know that. I don't think that was a huge step in the right direction. I think that's a fact. We all know that already. We've documented it at NPR many times. And, famine experts have said it. We know that, bakeries have shut down and there's no food for a lot of people, and food kitchens have shut down. And so, a few trucks maybe entering today is what we're seeing could happen, is not really, I think, what this visit could have produced had, I think, he really been focused on trying to really bring stability to this region and the kind of regional integration that he really wants. And I'll just end with an opening note, just saying that, yes, there was the freeing of an Israeli American soldier and hostage, Idan Alexander, just before he came, which really gave some hope and momentum that there would be some movement. But it seems that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is still outmaneuvering, Trump's wishes on getting this war to wind down, if that's indeed what he wants.
Thank you, Aya. We'll come back to some of these aspects that you've referenced in your opening remarks, the personal deals, business deals, and some of the foreign policy aspects that you mentioned as we delve into the details of the visit. Mohammed, let me come to you. I'll be interested in your sense. What's the view out in the region post-visit of President Trump and of the U.S.?
Thank you, Ambassador. And I think I will start by looking at from a wider angle on what does this mean, particularly from the Gulf. One, there are a number of shifts. First shift is that we have seen more focus on partnerships rather than alliances. So the concept of the alliance, the security alliance, the political alliance, was not fully featured in this. On the contrary, we've seen a lot of focus on partnership, be those tech partnership or economic partnerships, but a partnership where the standing is equal rather than with an alliance where, a weaker entity allies with a stronger entity. What Aya has referenced from the previous visits of his son also means that it was a two-way street. It was not one-way street. It was not GCC investing in the US. US was also investing in the GCC. Again, an equal standing, if you want, of some sort. Another one, another shift is there's a shift from this zero-sum calculus to a win-win calculus. And a win-win calculus means that I'm looking at things where we both need to be mutually beneficial from this relationship. It's not that I'm going to get your money and that's it. So a lot of focus was on the quantitative aspect, actually, of the deals, the number, the dollar sign. Little was being done on, are these new sectors that the GCC are investing in? which is different than real estate, different than bonds, different than the regular economic or the traditional economic investment. These were areas that were usually locked, not very accessible to the GCC, and now this has been opened up, which means a different degree of trust in that partnership that we've talked about that has not been hugely seen in the past. The other one was the toned down area of defense. We haven't heard a lot about F-35s or THAAD missiles, Reapers. There were defense deals, but they were not at the forefront. So the dollar sign did not come from defense deals. It came from investments, particularly in areas of the future. And that's where the new shift is, that this is a focus not on the current situation where we're living in. It's a relationship that's focused on the future. From AI to cryptocurrency to fintech, all of these are new areas, future areas of development. And if you look at the span of the commitments, we're talking about 10 years commitment rather than just 4 years or 2 years commitment, which means that we're trying to look ahead. So again, that's another shift in the relationship, which usually used to be based on we need THAADs or we need Patriots because of this attack or that attack. I think the last point I will say that there was some sort of a cultural equilibrium introduced in the visit. And I think the fact that President Trump's visit to the UAE started with the Sheikh Zayed Mosque, ended at the Abrahamic House, was quite obvious that this is now a new partnership based on respect for cultures, rather than the traditional idea of supremacist talk where, we represent the Western liberal thinking, we know things better, you need to. This was a total change in approach. So I think that's, at least to me, seems like to be the more wider understanding of how significant that beyond the dollar sign discussions.
Thank you, Mohammed. Aziz, a lot of times these visits, these big state-to-state visits tend to be, once the dust settles, sort of same old, same old. Mohammed has introduced the idea that actually there's some significant shifts involved. What's your sense of it? Were there some surprises on this visit or something unexpected?
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Ambassador, for moderating this, and it's good to join you all. I won't say there was stark surprises. There were things that were probably we expected to see, we kept our eye on, but not necessarily, I think, surprises. I think, to speak about, to Mohammed's point regarding where the investment was, the thing that to take away from this visit was how tech and investment heavy this was, and especially when it comes to the Saudi-American relationship. And I could probably for all, but I think particularly the Saudi-American angle, it was really the scope of the investment regarding tech, regarding investment, and I would say even the nexus in between them. This is where I think we could anticipate, or we could say that there was a clear milestone in Saudi-American relations. I think it would be in that. I don't see in other aspects of defense that this was anything different. It was, as you say, kind of business as usual, in my opinion, because when you look at some of these purchases, a lot of them were system upgrades. A lot of them was not fundamentally different than the previous kinds of visits. One of the things that I was anticipating to look at were two things to see how strategic this visit would be, and it would be on some matters of, I think, on the DNA of the defense relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and also the energy aspect, which is basically the nuclear file. And both of these things we didn't see much materialize. For me, I think it's not really surprising, but there was a lot of speculation, I would say, that led up to the meeting, that there was this discussion that they were willing to cooperate on nuclear issues. between Saudi Arabia and the United States without any kind of bypassing the Israeli normalization aspect. But that didn't materialize. And I think due to the complication of this file. Another thing that I really was trying to look at or keeping an eye on and wondering if it will materialize was if there will be some sort of security framework, some sort of security pact that kind of protected the progress made that Saudi Arabia made with the previous administration regarding kind of that regarding the steps towards a treaty. Now, I think for me, the Saudis, I think, would have been keen to try to perhaps protect that progress in some sort of official framework. But I think, and you know this more than I would, and you could speak to this more than I would, Ambassador, but the fact that it was part of the previous administration probably says that it was probably a non-starter. So I think, considering all these things, it was a success. And I think the reason being it was a success because there were expectations. There was a better management of expectations, in my opinion. I think when we compare this from the previous meeting in 2017, there was a massive, it was actually a bigger reception. But it was not only investment in the Saudi-US relationship, it was also an investment in Trump. And I think now they realized that there are some things that we could get from it, and there are things that we cannot get from it, which is kind of, he's very allergic to security, to really putting or investing or putting kind of, being there when Saudi needs them. And I hear reference, last week I've been on the media for some time, and I've always referenced the 2019 Al-Baghaig Al-Kharis attacks, 2019 Al-Baghaig Al-Kharis attacks. This was a true milestone in Saudi perception towards, I think, dealing with the United States. But I think they really put most of their eggs in where the things were tangible, in my opinion. So that speaks to the aspect of expectations. Just to mention, I think one point that Aya mentioned regarding Gaza, in my opinion, I think, unfortunately, I would say that it was the biggest disappointment, perhaps, that we didn't mention enough on Gaza, but I wouldn't say it was overly surprising. And the reason being is because I think when it came to the Saudi American kind of leg of the tour, I think there was a great deal of work regarding, not having Donald Trump or the president use Saudi Arabia as a platform for politicizing Saudi-Israeli normalization more. And I think they were really keen to try to say, listen, don't try to push this too much. The Saudis have been working very hard to communicate that there is no normalization unless there is a state, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, the fact that perhaps there wasn't enough talk on Gaza meant that there wouldn't be enough talk on aspects of normalization. So that's why it was somewhat compartmentalized. And I think the focus was on investment, et cetera. So overall, when it comes to aspects of expectations, the fact that they've channeled or focused their energy on this tech economy shade or aspect of these relations made it a success. And also just one final point, I promise, and then I'll be quiet. To speak to Mohammed's point, I mean, we've been saying this for how long? That it is a partnership and it's not an alliance. And that was actually one of the first pieces I wrote for AGSI, forgive me, AGSI, was that it was about the Saudi kind of Gulf-Israeli notion of alliance. I think alliances are used too much. They're used too lightly as a description of relations. And the more we use them, the more there is mis-expectations. And I think when we look at this aspect of partnership, this is where expectations are far more managed. And then we could see where the priorities are within that partnership. So the terminology is, I think, of the essence as well. So I think that's one of the reasons why it was a success.
Thank you, Aziz. I want to come back to you and just I'm going to hit one more time on the sort of I would say the introductory sort of aspects of the visit. I just President Trump in his speech celebrated what he termed quote the rapidly expanding marvels of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. And there was real admiration that he expressed for the progress that was being made out in the region, for the power and influence of these Gulf countries. The president's embrace seemed fulsome. Really, he leaned into it. I just would be interested in your assessment. What's your assessment of how that played out in the region? Did they embrace that fully? Were there any concerns expressed about it? Any sense of that?
I think as you were laying out your question, I started to think about the old centers of power like Beirut and Cairo and maybe Baghdad and Damascus. And I think part of the maybe mistake we sometimes make is focusing too much on basically 3 or 4 Gulf countries with a lot of money and a lot of potential to grow. They have a very young population who are really eager to, live in their countries, build their countries, invest in new industries, be entrepreneurs. They have a young generation of leaders who are really pushing forward a lot of these new industries like AI and tourism and others, diversifying their economies and thinking about the future, balancing their relations with Russia and China, but not at the expense of their security partnerships with the US. So I think, we do focus a lot on that and on the social transformations that are happening in the kingdom, but at the expense of sometimes just how important the region is as a whole. You can only look at Yemen and see, how destabilizing the attacks on the Red Sea have been. There was a war in Lebanon that destabilized that country even more. We had Bashar al-Assad's regime fall, right? This idea that you could contain Gaza, ignore Gaza, and just focus on, go around certain parts of the region that are inconvenient and just focus on the Gulf, we have learned over the past 2 years is simply not an equation that works. It does not lead to stability, regional integration, success. I think Saudi Arabia was very smart and savvy several years ago to look to China to broker, new ties with Iran, so that they're not just relying on the United States to sort of pick up that mantle and create some kind of regional stability there. And the UAE as well has done that. Qatar has always maintained those relations with Iran. So I think, when you look at the Gaza war, for example, what's happening there and these calls for displacement and taking over Gaza, these just outlandish ideas that don't really have any basis in reality, and it's not clear how they would even be executed or under what laws or with what support. You do have to still look at those places like Syria and Egypt, which are really, really important players here. And I think that kind of gets missed when we look at the region and sort of the response to this visit, because I try to look at it from many different angles, and Egypt has a very big role to play as well now when it comes to regional stability, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Libya, what's happening in Gaza, etc. So that's one thing. And I just think Trump coming here and saying, we're not going to tell you what to do, that may have been really interesting to American listeners. But I'll just emphasize again that for people in this region, America can't tell people what to do anymore, not with what's happening in Gaza, not with 16,000 plus children killed with mostly American weapons over the last 2 years. America simply cannot lecture this region about human rights, women's rights, reproductive rights, any kind of rights at this point, educational rights, equal rights, human rights in general. It's just something that America has lost sort of the global standing to do, and it happened under Biden, and it's continued with this war. And I think that's something Americans really need to understand. Going after the ICC, going after the ICJ, just unequivocal support no matter what happens. It has really shaken and undermined, I think, the messaging that Trump could bring to this region to have that kind of soft landing and that love. That said, people here love the United States. If you walk around Saudi Arabia, it's a lot of American restaurants, American companies. You had Palantir here, which is like an AI company that's, got security coordination with Israel, and a lot of their AI technology may have been used in attacks in Gaza. There is some stuff happening behind the scenes, if you look closely enough on this trip, that does suggest Saudi-Israel normalization is happening informally, on a slower, pace, but is the groundwork is being laid for that.
Thank you. I have very interesting on the regional aspects of the visit and how it fits into the broader sort of geostrategic scope out there. We'll come back to that, I think. Aziz, there was a lot of very positive body language in the visit. There were lots of handshakes. The welcoming ceremonies were warm. There was a lot of mutual praise and even adulation. How did that? How was that received out in the region? Was it viewed as a new chapter in U.S. Gulf relations, or is it more of a continuation of what we've had before?
No, I don't think it was a continuation. I think it was, for me, another illustration, and I think here, especially people here, have depicted it as such, that it's an illustration that the President of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, chose to visit this region first, or I would say this sub-region first. And it basically what they are showing and communicating is the fact that, listen, we are actually growing in this evolving multipolar world. This is actually our role, that we are becoming more economically we're becoming an economic destination. But I think for the points that Mohammed also mentioned, not because we are investors, but because we are receiving investments. And I think this is also part of that narrative as well, because what's very fascinating is that, and I said this before, you have an American first approach, or you have basically this trip can be depicted or summed up in a convergence of nation first approaches, and you have an American first approach, and it's from the Saudi perspective, converging with a Saudi first approach that we always hear time and again. And therefore there is this convergence, and there is this chemistry between the leaders, and therefore I think that's what they are amplifying, in my opinion, or at least focusing on, is that, listen, we are evolving, and therefore that's something to be proud of. I think one thing that I'd like to mention about was also a lot of the body language and the stop and this and hey and all that. It's clear, I mean, one of the questions that they've asked, is that if this is a warm relationship or if this is not a warm relationship, and how warm and friendly are these leaders. And I don't know if the question is about warmth or not, in my opinion. I think the question, more importantly, is it is clear that there's a lot of chemistry. There's just a lot of chemistry at the elite level, in my opinion, that seems to seek an understanding of getting things done, speaking to each other's logics. I'm not sure if I mean, Donald Trump is, and I'm not saying this to have a political point score or to jump on this, but I'm not sure if he's a warm guy. He's a cutthroat person, and I think many people understand and appreciate that. But he is someone that likes to do business, and then when it's time to do business, they prefer someone that likes to get down to it and not mention the aspect of these normative baggage that comes with the previous administrations, which then say, okay, I got the normative stuff out the way, let's now get down to business. I think that's what they really like, in my opinion. And therefore, I think, it was depicted as such. It was also not just the United States is here, but also, what is the United States looking for in us, which is that we're becoming, developing our role in this world in this multipolarizing world is developing. So that's, I think, the sense that I get. I think that's the crux of some of the communication afterwards and the discourse afterwards.
Thank you, Aziz. Mohammed, I'm going to wrap up this little segment that we've been sort of doing as a looking at some of the broader aspects of the visit and ask you to tackle our title directly. Are we entering into a new golden age of relations between the United States and Gulf countries? And let me ask the tag-on question, which is, what might be wrong with that picture? What has been left out or distorted maybe in the question of possibly entering a new chapter or a new golden age in relations?
Well, Ambassador Roebuck, if we're talking about a chapter, that means a chapter in a book, and there's possibly going to be another chapter, and then there's another chapter. And we don't want to go into the drama of all of that, which one has got the climax. But I will tell you, at least from my point of view, what we're seeing right now is the beginning of a Quincy2 agreement between the US and the GCC. A Quincy agreement was basically based on oil for security. Now we're having a different type of an agreement that is possibly going to last us for the next 50 years at least. This is a partnership rather than that's not based on security, but based on exchange. And if oil was the major factor, the new factor is AI, which is possibly the oil of the new age. And I think this is now a new type of realization of what do we see in each other. Now, frankly, the question about why did President Trump came to the GCC, why didn't he go to other countries, Israel, Egypt, Iraq, whatever? I think he sees in the GCC what China, India, and others are seeing in the GCC, which is a mega connector. And if we want to compare the type of reception he's got, the body language, as you were mentioning, shouldn't be comparing it with President Biden coming to Saudi Arabia. I think we should also comparing it to the type of reception President Modi, Prime Minister Modi, received when he got to the UAE. Or even if you want to go back, the type of reception President Bush has received when he came to the UAE. And I still remember that when he visited Dubai, there was a national, there was a day off for everyone to avoid the traffic. But for kids in school, that was a national holiday. So it's not exactly the same. And I think that is a sign of how important that relationship is. Now, if the Gulf is a mega connector, that means the US is not looking at the Gulf market at all by itself. It looks at the extension of that market. And I think this is pretty much the way the Gulf thinks about our relationship to the US as much as our relationship with Europe. IMEC is a connection between the global south and the global north. It's not between India and Europe alone. This is a transcontinental type of economic corridor that is being developed to make the world more connected. It is more of a supply chain type of relationship rather than just a trade type of relationship. I think President Trump is buying into this. And this is not because of his visit to the GCC. It's because of the way he's conducting the discussions, the nuclear negotiations with Iran. It is the way he is looking at the Houthis. The way he's looking at Israel. There wasn't much said about Gaza, but there was quite an obvious standpoint from the US. We're not going to Israel. It's not only the president, but also the minister of defense is not also going. So this is a new stand that we haven't seen before. And I think that says a lot more than just saying that, I'm here because I want the war to stop in Gaza. It's a beginning of a shift where the Israeli government also have to notice that it has to do things differently because the world is changing. I think it's sending very good vibes to India. It sends very good vibes to even China. It sends very good vibes to the whole BRICS group. Because if economy is going to be first, not security, then things are going to change. And they're not going to change in the region. They might change all the way up to the South China Sea. This is a new tectonic shift, in my view. We are not really appreciating a lot what President Trump is doing over here.
Thank you, Mohammed. I want to move now and talk a little bit about perceptions about the U.S. as a reliable partner, a reliable security partner, a reliable destination for investment, a reliable trading partner. Aziz, let me start with you. You mentioned the formal agreement that the Saudis did not get on security. How do you think that the U.S. is viewed now out in the region as a reliable security partner? Have things changed, or is it still viewed as this is an important aspect of the overall relationship?
In my opinion, I don't think it has changed fundamentally. I think that it ebbs and flows time and again, but the more one looks at kind of the Saudi-American relationship, there is a theme that is, in my opinion, very overlooked in this partnership. I think there's always friendship, there's always sometimes frustration, sometimes jubilation, but there is, I would say, a theme of anxiety at times that people have not, I think, appreciated enough. And therefore, I think this hasn't gone away fundamentally. I don't think this has been addressed. I think they would look at, for example, the U.S. Houthi agreement about the ceasefire, and that was an example that, yes, all of a sudden here was a campaign that was against the Houthis, but then it was stopped immediately when it was convenient. That even Israel was not part of that deal. So the next day the Houthis actually attacked Ben Gurion Airport. So I think when the Saudis would, in my opinion, even others would say, listen, again, we've seen this before, and therefore we're not going to react to any kind of perceived opportunities that the United States would be that gives it a sign that it's playing a more proactive role, because it could just immediately stop. And that's because there's nothing stopping them from stopping. There is no alliance. There is no alliance. So I think when you understand the limitation of some relations, it may strengthen it in other parts, and it may even strengthen it on this aspect of reliability as well. And that's why I think understanding the nature, the very DNA of this relationship when it comes to aspects of reliability, in my opinion, is an investment in the relationship in itself. And that was one thing that I spoke with, interlocutors before. And I was just saying, maybe there's just too much misexpectation when it comes to our relationship. We keep using the wrong terminology. We keep, having obviously different people in and out with different administrations. And so we hear different language. Some of the stuff that Donald Trump said in the GCC American summit was no different than what Biden said. And he came in 2022 that we're here. No, America isn't going anywhere. And maybe I would say, I think from our side is that we're also understanding how and why people would say, why the president would say this. And he's not really saying it to us. He's also saying it to say, listen, we are not Biden. We're not the Biden administration. So this articulation of a dedication to your security is very politically motivated as well at times. So I think when it comes to that aspect hasn't changed when it comes to the reliability. I think when it comes to the United States as an investment and also being the receiving end of American investment, in my opinion, I think that perhaps strengthened a little bit because, it is a language, a logic that they all share, which is, Saudi first and an American first approach means business first approach. And therefore, this is something that I think, is music to many people's ears, especially with the entrepreneurial environment that is now increasing in Saudi Arabia. So on this aspect, I think, there's not only a reliability, but I would say a desirability as well to work with the United States. And as I said, no matter where we go, no matter what happens, there is still that desire to work with the United States. There's still that. One of the things that I think, one of the catch words or phrases that's used time and again is multipolarity. And yes, there is indeed this aspect of multipolarizing world. But I've said this before, that I think when it comes to Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia still sees the United States as its main preference, main option, main actor it really wants to work with. There's a lot of people that still have that cultural connection or that soft connection still there. So I think this relationship is quite still desired there. From the defense aspect, there's still some fundamental issues that need to be at least engaged with.
Thank you, Aziz. I a little bit more on this reliability or unreliability of the U.S. as a partner out there. President Trump created, I think, a lot of openings for possibilities out there. Some potential breakthroughs. I mean, obviously we talked about Syria, but there were others. There was a lot of potential and hype and that kind of thing. Do you think there's confidence in the region that his administration, that President Trump, that they have the focus and that they will implement on all of this potential from the visit, or will it remain largely as things talked about and discussed, but perhaps not implemented very fully?
So I think, if you look at it from two different lenses, one is like what we call the man on the street, the average Saudi or the average Emirati. How closely were they paying attention to this visit? Not very much. I'll tell you, like 2 days or a day before his arrival, the only reason the Uber driver, Saudi man, knew Trump was coming was because some roads started to get blocked and it started to get really crowded. And so, I think for average people in the region, they kind of leave it to their leaders to make these policy decisions and trust in their leadership that they know what they're doing and will guide, the ship in the right direction. And I think, there's an understanding that on a, leadership level or maybe a more senior level, decision-making level, that, Trump can be pretty unpredictable. Like Aziz said, he was extremely unpredictable in his first term. He's proven to be surprising on his second term, continues to be full of surprises, both domestically in the US and of course, foreign policy wise. And in a way, you can look at that through two ways. You can say that is a little bit, it brings out some anxiety, it brings out some concerns. It's not exactly, the best way forward, but also I would say this too, the past decades of American policy in the region haven't been great for this region. They really haven't been good for this region. Whether that's the war in Iraq or the war in Gaza we're looking at now, or so many other, decisions under Obama or Bush or, Biden or Trump. So it just hasn't been amazing. Like, American policy in the region has been great maybe for American, business interests or American security interests, but it hasn't always benefited the region. And so to do things differently, to do things unexpectedly like Trump does, to do things kind of, untraditionally, I think people in this region are really welcoming of that this time around, because the old way just isn't working for this region. And you saw it, I think, really clearly under 4 years under Biden. It was a very traditional approach to the region, the fist bump over, Jamal Khashoggi's killing. You had, this unequivocal support for Israel that really just decimated the Gaza Strip. There's so many things that happened in this region under Biden that were very traditional and expected. And I think Trump's coming in and saying, I think we can do things differently. And I have the mandate to do things differently. And so you saw that with the decision that he made after speaking with the Crown Prince and Turkey's president to lift sanctions on Syria. And he has the mandate to do it. He can probably push this through Congress and get that done. And that really is something that will change this region. Syria is not a small country. It's a pillar of the region. It's a historical, civilizational crossroads. Damascus cannot be on its knees like this forever. And it brings in business and it brings in, potential stability. You'll get refugees and people going back to Syria, hopefully living in their homes. The potential is immense. So yeah, I actually kind of think like Trump's unexpected kind of surprise moves aren't aren't like that bad in the context of where things have been for a lot of the, I think, leaders looking at, US policy and where it's headed.
Thank you, Aya. I'm going to come back to Syria in a second, but I want to ask Mohammed one more question on this reliability issue. Trump announced his April 2nd, Liberation Day language on tariffs. And that announcement rocked the international markets. Is there some tariff anxiety out in the Gulf now? Is there some concern that President Trump and his administration have an intention to rewrite decades-old rules of the road for trade and for international financial dealings that could impact on the visions and the development plans of Gulf countries?
I think there is an anxiety. The source of that anxiety is that if the GCC countries actually believe in connectivity as a major way of developing their relationship, economic and diplomatic, across the world, so tariffs are just like blocks on the road. They would slow down that connectivity. So there is that anxiety. But on the other side, we've seen how the discourse on competition have changed from the discourse on nuclear weapons with Russia or a showdown in the South China Sea to a discourse on tariffs. The wars we're talking about now are trade wars. They're not nuclear wars anymore. They're not kinetic wars. And I think regardless of how you think about tariffs, that is definitely a positive shift on what could constitute a basis of conflict. And based on what you're seeing right now, there are a lot of deals. I think, and at least in my opinion, one of the reasons why possibly we will see, or we have seen a lowering down of tariffs between US and China is that the US is emphasizing the fact that it would need a more fairer access to rare earth minerals than China would allow. And if China accepts this, then China is a winner and the US is a winner. And actually the whole world where access to rare earth minerals is possibly going to become a better place. So this is an ongoing thing. I am not a fan of judging things before the process is over. But overall, I think we're seeing far more focus on this geoeconomics game. And I think it's far less costly than the security geopolitical game that we used to be involved in the past.
Thank you, Mohammed. I'm interested now in shifting to some of the foreign policy aspects that came up in the visit. We'll come back, I think, to some of these big deals and economic relationships that were discussed, but let's talk a little about the foreign policy things. I had talked about Syria and the importance of this decision by President Trump to lift sanctions. I'd be interested in your take, Mohammed, and also Aziz, just a quick take from you about the significance of this decision, and if you have any concerns about it or any way that you would like to see it caveated, or do you just support it? Aziz, you want to start?
Sure. I'll just say a few words on this. I think there's also, as I mentioned earlier, that this will bring a lot of support, much needed support for Syria. But there is, in my opinion, an angle also about the Gulf here and how I would say the GCC states and particularly Saudi Arabia would play a role in this. In my opinion, we cannot isolate this decision from the reconstruction of not just Syria and Lebanon and Gaza, but we can't isolate these questions from the reconstruction of Saudi's economy as well. And that's what they're going through as well. We are in the midst of rebuilding our economy. And therefore, I think when we have such a signal from Donald Trump to say, listen, we're going to lift sanctions, this is, in my opinion, a psychological boost for some of these countries to play, even to be more confident in playing even more of a role in these countries, because I think it releases some of the burden, the financial burden, etc., that they, I think, are so keen to move away from. I think, we are, I think we are very, at times, sensitive to when the issue of money comes up, because a lot of the times we perceive people by saying our role in anybody's problems around the world is to financially sweep this up, and we're fed up with this, and we actually find this insulting in many ways, because it speaks that as if we are irrational and we're just there to please everyone, and that's just not the case. That's not the case, and so I think now what this has essentially done is actually help the Gulf players play more of a role in these spheres, in Syria and even potentially elsewhere. And that's what I was trying to say about this is now a time to help leaders help the situation. A lot of the times people will say, come on, these Arab states, they're bigger and they're more muscular now, and they're flexing. But why aren't they playing a role? Why aren't they playing more of a role? Yeah, well, because they're not reckless in terms of the idea that we're just going to spend or invest in a situation that will simply be a bottomless pit. There has to be a structural improvement on some of these situations in order for us to participate, because we have our own economy to do this as well. So, and again, I think we're trying to balance and strike this balance between the regional needs and our national needs, because also our national visions cannot really materialize fully without a prosperous region. This is, I think, clear. And at the same time, it's a dependable relationship. We need to invest in nations. We need to invest internally in order to be stronger abroad, and we need to invest basically around the region in order to strengthen our situation internally. And so I think that's what I take, is that it's a signal, psychological signal, for us to participate even more.
Thank you, Aziz. Mohammed, what about Syria? What's your take on the decision to lift sanctions and the president's decision to meet with Ahmed al-Shara?
I think I'll take both Syria and Iran and connect it to one of the points I've mentioned before, which is that this is now not a superlative relationship between the US and the GCC. Remember that the GCC wanted to do something similar during Assad's time, which was an investment in the state of Syria rather than in the regime itself. But the US administration at that point of time did not accept it. Comes in President Trump and say, look, you've been doing things, you see things differently, let me give you this. Let me see how far this can go. And I think it's the same thing that is happening, going on now with Iran. The de-escalation with Iran that the GCC has started is now what is leading the negotiations between Iran and the US. It's 30 years of an attempt to isolate Iran did not pay any dividends. And I think in 3 years of de-escalation with Iran, the GCC have seen a more active Iran in engaging state to state rather than non-state to non-state. And I think, again, he's doing the same thing. So he comes from a point of view that he doesn't feel that I am entitled, I'm better than everyone else, I understand. And I think this was the gist of his speech in Riyadh. You guys have done things you didn't need people to tell you. And he is now saying, okay, let me take a page from your book and see how far this can go. And I think that is the real significance. It's not whether he accepted Shara or not. And I think that he said, this is a regionally led approach. Let me support the region. If you were ever talking about, burden sharing is not in security. Burden sharing also in diplomacy. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Thank you, Mohammed. Can I follow up and ask you to speak a little bit more about this Iran issue? Iran got a little attention at the during the visit, but it wasn't heavily focused on. What's your sense of the U.S. approach to these negotiations? Are people out in the region concerned that they won't work, or do they think that they're on the right track? How do you see that issue, the Iranian negotiations with the U.S. on the nuclear file?
Now, I think Iran was underlying like the issue of Iran and, what will happen with its nuclear program. I think it was, looming over, or you could say kind of underlying a lot of this visit. It may not have been explicitly mentioned many times. He did mention it, President Trump, in his speech in Riyadh, very clearly and forcefully. He was very tough in his language on Iran. But I think otherwise, it wasn't an issue that was entirely dismissed or not really present throughout the visit. I think it was. And I think what we saw in this visit is the president consulting with Gulf countries. I think you're here, Aziz and Mohammed, kind of mentioning that over and over again. This region is now being consulted. It's being heard. That's new. That wasn't the case for many years. So they're being heard, they're being consulted, and that includes on Iran. That includes on how to go about the talks. The Iranian foreign minister had just visited a bunch of these Gulf countries right before Trump came. And so there's a lot of back channel discussions happening, and the Gulf is very involved in those talks from behind the scenes. So I think, will these talks pan out? Who knows? Because I don't think that President Trump has really explained to his administration exactly what they would agree to with Iran, what exactly they want to do with their nuclear enrichment. I think there's still a lot that's a big question mark, and I think the Saudis are looking to that as well to sort of see how to go about their own civilian nuclear program and how to pursue it. So there's still a lot of questions unanswered. It's still very early, but Iran is definitely a major issue looming over a lot of the visit, and pretty much, will continue to be. These talks kind of have to succeed. What's the alternative? Bombing Iran? I don't see how that would be good for business in the Gulf, travel. I don't see how that would be good for Dubai's economic, progress, or Qatar or Saudi Arabia. So these talks kind of have to succeed. There's a lot riding on them, and I think that Gulf countries are really making sure that Trump is listening to that.
Very good. Thank you. I like the point you make about the fact that maybe if it wasn't mentioned a lot explicitly, but it does loom as an issue in the background, and people are concerned about it. Aziz, we got one question from the audience I wanted to raise at this point, and fold it into a broader question about the other states that President did not visit. Some concern that the 3 states he visited got tremendous amounts of attention that, maybe the other Gulf states did not receive the attention that they deserve. One of the audience members mentions Kuwait in this regard. And of course, the other countries, Oman and Bahrain, members of the GCC as well. Any sense about how the visit is perceived out in the Gulf, and how does it play into relations between them, competition, a sense that maybe not everybody got the attention they deserved?
It's still early to tell, in my opinion, to see this, but because I think, in my opinion, if I was to read, I think, Omani foreign policy well, I think that they probably, while they would have liked to have an American president probably go there, the way they like to do things is to be very quiet. And I think one of the reasons why they function the way they do in the GCC and elsewhere is to maintain that very quiet and functional diplomacy. And, it is important to know that, Donald Trump is, he is huge. He is a massive character, and he's always a massive, story.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really one of the things that I would say, had to be managed and channeled. And so I think it was an opportunity to receive I would say, or to position themselves to receive the best that they can from the United States and best that they can from this Trump administration. And I'm not sure if obviously Bahrain could have done it or Oman. Oman is probably a bit more, probably Donald Trump may complicate things. Of course, I wish Mohammed could speak to this point a bit more as well. But I think for me, those three states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, had a lot of, clearly they have their visions. Oman has this 2040 vision, by the way, but that they were very proactive and positioning themselves into speaking to something that Donald Trump would have liked, which is investment. And it's basically not just, again, goes back to, we're circling back again, not just we'll be the recipients of investment, or I'm sorry, we'll be investors in your economy, but the recipients of investment. And it took a lot of hard work. It was a lot of hard work for them to be there, and so I don't think it's overly surprising that he visited those three countries.
Thank you, Aziz. I might stick with you for just a second, and then I'm going to broaden this issue and talk to the others. But the issue of Yemen, are people in the region comfortable with the ceasefire? It didn't come up too much in the visit. I think President Trump referenced the situation with the Houthis in his public remarks. Are people comfortable with the ceasefire that the U.S. negotiated with the Houthis? And what's the view of that deal in Riyadh and in general the future of Yemen?
Well, I'll have to say they certainly did welcome it, because I think any kind of escalation is something that's just not, has a lot of security resonance and security concerns. So the fact that they brokered this it speaks to a great deal of a lot of relief, I would say. But I have to say there's still a great deal of concern when it comes to Yemen. I think the Yemeni situation is just not, it requires a lot of work on that front. And this is where I think while we're talking about rapprochement with Iran, this is still one of the outstanding files that we have with Iran. And the thing is, I think, the problem with this escalation with the Houthis is that it is very much receptive to regional flare-ups. They are reactive and opportunistic. We're trying to seek regional legitimacy and also domestic legitimacy. And therefore, I think the situation in Gaza simply gives them a more and more of an opportunity to try to flex and to project themselves. And therefore, I think this situation makes everyone uneasy, but also it speaks to the aspect of not just connectivity of, we're speaking of the aspect of connectivity, not just the aspect of connectivity of our economies, but actually we're seeing more and more a connectivity of conflict. That one place of conflict can instigate somewhere else. And so when we're looking at the situation in Yemen, there is a lot of work that requires, a better relationship from the Gulf Iran aspect, a better relationship from the Gulf American aspect, a better relationship from the Gulf and the European aspect. And there has to be a lot more harmonizing on this front, and then we could see a process. But for right now, I think it's just going to be, a gradual tactical approach of just, waiting for the right time till we could make a strategic push, whatever that strategic push may be. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you, Aziz. I'm going to move over to Aya and shift the focus a bit, Aya, to another foreign policy challenge. You referenced it earlier, and Aziz also talked about it, which was normalization with Israel and the Gaza situation. I wonder, Aya, and we have a question from the audience a little bit about this, focus on informal contacts. I think one of you referenced between Israel and I think you did actually, between Israel and Saudi Arabia, or indirect type of reactions to each other. What's your sense about the Gaza conflict in the region, in the Gulf region? Has it damaged the prospects for future normalization irreparably or seriously, or how do you view the issue?
Thank you for that question. First of all, those back channel, kind of dealings, a lot of them are happening through, I think, investments like the $2 billion that the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, overseen by the Crown Prince, put into Jared Kushner's private equity fund, Affinity Partners. A lot of that money, or some of that money, is going into Israeli companies, including those I've read that have ties with settlements. And so you just need to look a little closer to sort of, as they say, follow the money trail. And then you can kind of see how it's not so black and white. And I think one thing we have to do always is like separate the current Israeli government from the state of Israel. I think, what we're seeing is Trump sidelining Netanyahu, not the state of Israel. I think what we're seeing with the Saudis is them saying, this isn't going to happen with this government at this time. Too much blood on their hands, too much rhetoric that can't be walked back about a refusal to even consider the prospects of a two-state solution, of a Palestinian state. I think all of that makes it really impossible for a country like Saudi Arabia, which, has the mantle of, being home to the two most holy sites in Islam and being a real pillar of the region, economically and culturally, but, mainly religiously, to put their hands in the hands of this government. Who would it be? Smotrich or Ben-Gvir or Netanyahu? Which one would it be? So I think that makes things very, very difficult with this particular government at this particular time. And my sense from what I've been seeing is that this is something that President Trump may be coming around to understanding. We saw him announce talks with Iran, with Netanyahu, to his right at the White House. We've seen him sideline Israel on the Houthi ceasefire. We've seen him sideline Israel on decision to lift sanctions on Syria. We've seen him sideline Israeli normalization to go ahead with talks for Saudi Arabia's civilian nuclear program, which was something that had been tied to normalization. So we've seen, I think, enough, moves to suggest that there's maybe a fallout happening behind the scenes here. With this particular government, which has really put itself in a bind when it comes to people starving in Gaza, not being able to get food, not having a day after plan, and fully embracing kind of the most right-wing ideas possible on the future of Gaza and Palestinians there. They call it voluntary migration, as you know, but living conditions there make it impossible to survive. So I think, when you look at all of that, normalization with Israel is still possible. And I think it's something that, from everything I've seen, the Saudis have not said it will never happen. If you look at their words closely, they've kept it vague enough where they say it can happen when we see a pathway towards a Palestinian state. And what does a pathway towards a Palestinian state mean? It could mean a lot of things. It needs rhetoric at the very bare minimum, which we're not even getting from this current government. So I think you just need to differentiate between Israel as a state and the very many views there and the different shades of politics there with this current very right-wing government.
Ambassador, if I could, if you don't mind, just add just a little bit.
Please go ahead. Go ahead, Aziz.
So I appreciate what Aya said about the investment of PIF and Affinity, and I just want to add some sequence into this. So I think the investment that the PIF made into Affinity Limited, or whatever it was, for Jared Kushner's thing or fund, was in 2021. It was, I think, one of the first stops that he tried to get, and therefore it was still in the process of even building and building this fund. So when the PIF made that kind of investment there, it was clearly an investment in probably Jared Kushner and potentially the Jared Kushner in the future and what this may be. It was in 2023 that Affinity Partners began then to invest in some of these Israeli companies, I think the automotive companies. And so I think, you see, so that's important, I would say, to mention also, because it wasn't a deliberate kind of investment. But where there is, I think this question that I think I mentioned, which is a very important one, because actually what I'm researching just now, which is these kind of tacit interactions that take place. A lot of it has to do with really the origins of the company itself. Now, where is the company? Is this company probably Israeli owned but American based? Is this company Israeli? I don't know. There's a lot of legalities to this that kind of find some sort of space where it becomes a tacit interaction, but really, I would say, I wouldn't say a clear direct investment. There's a lot of indirect investments, and also some of these funds and investments are in what people would call probably a limited profile. So it was part of some sort of investment fund, and an investment fund then kind of looks into invest some things in Israel and vice versa, etc. So there are some still stops and barriers, but you can't deny this connectivity. And this is something that I think the Crown Prince alluded to in his Fox 2023 meeting or interview, where he said Saudi is just too big for someone not to be connected with. You know, it's simply the economy is the biggest economy in the Middle East. So I think, you know, those are just some of the few words that I would say about this. It's best sometimes I would argue, to look at this as tacit interactions, rather than kind of sometimes people will say, this is a clear kind of direct investment somehow. And if there is, it's very difficult to prove because a lot of these things may be undercover. We just don't know. But those are just my 2 cents on this.
Thank you, Aziz. Mohammed, we've hit several foreign policy aspects of the visit. I would welcome any comments you have on, I think you talked a little bit about the Iranian thing. If you have other comments on the foreign policy aspects of the visit, please weigh in on them. And I also wanted to talk to you, and going back a little bit to just the overwhelming focus of the visit on deals, economic deals, investments, and just get your sense about what's real in that and what is significant in all those deals.
I'll possibly focus on the second part, which is the deals. Again, what I said, I think the deals fairly says that economy is first. And I think that suggests this idea of shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics. I think that is the big title in the visit. The second title is that there is a lot on knowledge transfer. Again, this is an area that hasn't been the big sort of strength power between US and the GCC. For knowledge transfer, we had to go to places like Korea and China, but not to the US. So saying that the US cannot survive if it keeps building walls around itself, it will need to build new roads. I think that is the change in the security matrix that we've always have used. So there's a new sense of security being developed right now, and I think it is based on connectivity. The other thing is that I think the deals with the GCC also entails deals with other countries, not only with the GCC. So Taiwan was mentioned in the discussions. Korea is mentioned in the discussions, but I also think India and China will have to be mentioned in the discussions at some point. And I think it's reaffirmation of this idea that we are living truly in a hyper-globalized world, mainly driven by digitization. It's not going to be going backwards. On globalization, I don't think the clock is ticking backwards at all. So I think there's a realization from the Trump administration, which is counter to what we've thought we were hearing when he was talking about tariffs, that this is the end of free trade, it's the end of globalization, tariff will stop everything. I don't think it's stopping everything. It's actually creating new type of dynamics. So this new type of dynamic that we see in the relationship with the GCC are not going to stop at the GCC. And I think this is what is really noteworthy about those deals.
Thank you, Mohammed. And a little bit more on these deals that took place. You mentioned in your opening remarks some of the private deals that preceded the visit that President Trump's son was engaged in. I'm interested in your take just on the references before and throughout the visit about these types of deals to the Trump Towers in Gulf capitals, the golf courses. You mentioned the cryptocurrency. How is this viewed out in the region? Is it accepted as this is part of the sort of the broader discourse of a visit like this, or as an exchange, as viewed as like this is a two-way investment street, and therefore it's viewed in a positive angle in that way, as Mohammed mentioned it? What's your take on this these aspects of private dealings?
I would guess that many people here from the region see it as a smart investment, because this region is one of the few in the world that has a lot of money and a lot of space to grow still. It's not crowded yet. The market still has a lot of space to grow. It's still, it's somewhere between an emerging market and a market that's kind of, emerged. So you don't really have a lot of places with those kind of factors. And then you add to that a very young, large population coming of age, requiring jobs and, the housing and all of that. So I think when you look at like a place like Qatar, where you're going to get this like massive golf course, it probably makes sense because, Qatar could have another golf course. Why not? And it could be Trump branded. It doesn't hurt anybody there. There's a lot of money there and a lot of investments that come through from all over the world, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, whatever, right? Same in Dubai. The property markets here are booming. There are so many branded buildings. So having a huge Trump branded tower, hotel, just adds to the list of, Armani's and Versace's and, Bugatti buildings here. And in Saudi Arabia, there's a Trump tower being built in Jeddah. There's also this, and I'll just say there's a Saudi company, private Saudi company, building these that I just mentioned. And so there's also a massive golf course and hotel Trump branded, community in Oman. There's so many projects. So it's definitely important to keep an eye on, but I would imagine that the Gulf countries here and people here think, well, it makes sense. Why not? This is where you would do that. This is the place where, ostentatious, kind of new money, flashy, branded, residential communities are embraced. It's where else in the world could you have this? And you can do this in Europe. You can do this in other parts of the world. So I feel like it makes sense, and I think it's not looked at as corruption or anything like that. I think it's probably just looked at here more as like it makes dollars and cents.
Can I add to the question I asked? Where else? Vietnam. This is the newest Trump tower that's being built right now is in Vietnam. I think there's a realization of the value of the Asian markets, not only in the Gulf.
Right. Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you, Aya, for that. Aziz, I want to come back to you. You talked earlier about, and I wanted to ask you to elaborate on it a little bit, the nuclear file and the fact that the Saudis did not get a nuclear agreement. They didn't really move that issue forward very much because of the complexities involved. How much of a sense of disappointment is there that the Saudis did not move it forward more? Or is there maybe a sense that it didn't happen on this visit, but it's well positioned to make progress in the intermediate future? How do you see that issue?
Well, I'm very tempted to give the floor to the honorable guests that Aya has to answer this very complicated question. They seem far smarter than I am right now, but since they're gone to more important things, I'll answer this question now. But I would say it was an opportunity, and in my opinion, I think they feel confident that they could probably reach it. It's something that they could work on and develop, because in my opinion, while they could have done this, it's a very complicated one. It's a very complicated one. And I mean, you tell me, from your vantage point in DC, of course, getting a treaty, even in the Trump, the previous administration, was always very difficult. It was never a done deal. But I think probably one of this file potentially is probably more complicated with the 123 agreement and the ambitions that Saudi has regarding exporting uranium, etc. So there is, in my opinion, I would say an intention, a hope to keep this file, to keep this file alive. I believe that this is a president that they could probably get something with, get this through the line. But it's going to take time. And I think, in my opinion, they also sense that here is an opportunity that where they will have a partner in the White House that will not take Israel too much into account when it comes to this file. And I think that was the signal that they sent earlier, before, when it comes to the fact that, listen, if we get this deal, it's not going to be tied to a Saudi-Israeli normalization. It's going to be tied, it's going to be whether or not, we get the right deal. So I think this is, while this was, they could have, it may have been disappointing not to get it, but I think also not surprising because there's still a lot of negotiations that are required for this. So, this is, I would say, watch this space. This is something that they could probably get, probably one of the achievements that they will, I think, invest really a lot in before the end of the Trump administration is this file. If they could get this file, this is the opportunity. And the fact that Israel is not a complicator in this file speaks of the fact that they really believe in the tangibility of this. So we'd say watch this space.
Thank you, Aziz. Mohammed, what about expectations out in Abu Dhabi? Were all of them met for this visit? And what's next do you see in the relationship with the Emirates and the United States?
Yeah, I think what we've seen was a seed investment that would require a lot of work afterwards. A lot of the ideas that has been put forward, a lot of the investments would require other investments in human development, human capital development, in research, in education. These are huge areas of partnership that does not have a dollar sign attached to it right now. So I think that is the expectation. Also, the application. I mean, we cannot have an AI that is going to serve only the countries that think alike. AI will have to serve everyone, people across. And if you look at the majority of the number of people, their concentration are in Asia and Africa. And that is why if you don't develop an AI that is accessible to the global south, you're going to lose on the sensors, you're going to lose on the data that will feed into the AI. So again, there's a huge partnership that needs to be developed. It's not just, an agreement between two companies.
Thank you, Mohammed. I checked in with our other guests about unmet expectations. Any observations from you about unmet expectations for this visit?
I think it gave us what we expected, which was a few surprises, a lot of big deals, including a lot of weapons deals, especially, and also tech and AI. I think one thing that really was jarring or surprising to me was just seeing all these CEOs come with Trump, this massive entourage who really brought the who's who of American billionaires and CEOs to Riyadh, and seeing them one by one line up and shake hands with the Crown Prince and have that conversation with Trump and him standing side by side really was like a relaunch for the Crown Prince on a global level. And I think, just 7 years after Khashoggi's killing really had, damaged his reputation internationally. And he was seen as, unstable and an erratic leader. I think this is really a reset for him as well. So I think Trump understood that when he brought this entourage of CEOs to meet him one-on-one and come all the way to Riyadh to hope to do business with him and seek investments as well. I think that was a surprise, or at least just the image of that was really drove home just how important this visit was to the Crown Prince as well. Like I said, on Gaza, not too many surprises there. It wasn't missed probably opportunities to sort of, really bring home just how, consequential that war is, and the repercussions of it are not contained. They are not confined. And, coming out again and calling it a freedom zone like he did, and not really expressing exactly like a clear vision for Gaza, I think probably was a missed opportunity. But and I was surprised. I didn't think he would double down on that plan again in the region, but maybe Syria was just a step too far for people and he had to kind of balance that out. I don't know. But yeah, I think overall it was exactly what we expected. A lot of pomp, a lot of ceremony, a lot of big deals, and yeah, great, PR for Trump to come home with, and also for the Gulf leaders to showcase what they can offer the United States.
Thank you, Aya. So we're coming to the close of the discussion. I wanted to give each of you a minute, approximately, to wrap up. If you have a final observation you want to make, and Mohammed, why don't we start with you?
I will repeat what Aziz said about watch the space. I think there is a lot that hasn't been announced yet. And I think that would not be only on the Gaza issue, which is expected to see development in New York end of the month, and not only on the nuclear program, which I think is a must and something that the US should be seeking rather than Saudi Arabia, who's got a number of options on the table. But I think it's on how the crises of this world can be addressed in a way that would actually help more flow of trade and money, not only to the US, but also from the US outside. This is where the expectation that Trump is going to be a major disruptor of the rule-based order, I think might be a dream misinterpreted of some sort.
Thank you, Mohammed. Aziz?
Yeah, so I very much agree with what Mohammed said and second that. One of the things that I'm thinking about is already the post-Trump era. I know we just started, but I would say how we are, how are we depicted in the United States, in my opinion. And I think that's something that we have to be perhaps more cognizant of, to avoid being treated as perhaps Trump legacies within this. Because I think, Saudi Arabia, in the way he's talking about Saudi Arabia, I think we could glean off, I think, the very tense start that we had with President Biden. Qatar is facing an uphill battle also regarding its dynamic with Gaza and with Hamas and et cetera. And how he went there and he got this present of a massive airplane, and so I'm now, the question that I have is really how can we avoid being polarized in American politics? And I think this is one thing that perhaps my eyesight is on. We have to position ourselves better. We have to perhaps be more proactive, speak to more people, invite more people across the aisles, be more engaging with the United States. And I'm sure we're doing that, but we just need to be more open with it. And I think that will help then have a softer landing with whoever will be in the White House in the next administration.
Very interesting. Thank you, Aziz. I'll give you the last word.
I would just say I'm looking at a couple of things. I'm going to keep looking at, the business deals that benefit the Trump family. I'm going to keep looking at those. I feel like, we did see a slew of them just before he arrived to the region, but something tells me that's not the end of that. So I'll keep looking at those. Another thing I'll be watching for is how, Trump's concentration level and Steve Witkoff, these men have taken on a lot of different files, and how much they'll be able to really execute and see through the lifting of serious sanctions. the stabilization of Gaza, the rebuilding, all of that. I mean, is he going to leave from this region and just be, you know, overwhelmed with all these domestic issues in Ukraine and other things? Or, you know, are they going to be really focused on getting, you know, Iran talks over the finish line, getting the Gaza war to end, getting a permanent ceasefire in there, releasing the hostages, getting Hamas out of Gaza is something that the UAE and Saudi Arabia are pretty much on board with. So it'll just be interesting, and I think really important to really watch just the concentration level and all the moving pieces around that when you look at also just like Netanyahu's government and their insistence on, you know, continuing this war to no end. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff I'll be really looking at, is like, what did this trip really bring about as far as regional stability? I think it's too early to say, but you know, let's hope something comes out of this beyond just big, you know, $1 trillion deals.
Thank you, Aya. And I want to thank all of our guests for brilliant insights and the great discussion today. Audience members, thank you as well for attending our meeting. I look forward to seeing all of you at another event that we have for AGSI. And that's it for today. Thank you all.